Hi everyone, welcome to Sci 113, Professional Ethics. So we're going to begin our first presentation today, which is going to kind of introduce us to kind of this topic, especially regarding how we want to be ethical and be the best kind of mental health providers we can be. So if you give me a second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and let's go to presentation mode as my computer starts to speed up, hopefully. Okay, so again, this little talk is going to be on Intro to Professional Ethical Practices, mainly for mental health providers. So welcome to this class. In the class, we're going to discuss what constitutes ethical practice in the mental health field. We're going to do this by exploring various ethical decision-making models, as well as review and promote professional practice and the use of self-care. So self-care is how, as providers, can we take care of ourselves, because we deal with situations that have a lot of high stress, and we can have caseloads or volume that can take a toll on us, not only mentally, but also physically. So we're going to talk about self-care practices that can help us be the best providers we can be and prevent burnout or other sorts of psychological injury and even physical injury as well. Part of that too, we're going to talk about appropriate boundaries. What we mean by boundaries is, as a professional, we can play many different roles, and we don't want our roles to create any negative impacts or potential issues between who we are as a person as well as the people we're working with. So we want appropriate boundaries and appropriate roles we're utilizing. We want to still be genuine as a mental health provider, but at the same time, we can't be our full selves because that could impact the therapeutic process for our clients. We want those professional boundaries established. And finally, in addition to that, consultation and supervision. So, very briefly, what we mean by consultation and supervision is seeking assistance and help with other professionals, whether it be peers or a clinical supervisor who, whether depending on the state you're in, may help you in dealing with the professional ethical issues in the mental health field. In addition to that, we want to demonstrate patients' and clients' rights by promoting advocacy, empowerment, and understanding protection regulations such as HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and being aware of cultural influences. Okay, so why is this important? So again, this course we have professional practice, we also have ethics, and they're two separate entities, but they work well together. So let's start off with professional practice. So in the mental health field, we work with individuals, groups, couples, families, children who may be in a vulnerable state. They may be a member of a vulnerable, disenfranchised group, and or maybe in situations that could be potentially dangerous. That's just the nature of our work. We're dealing with people who are in a vulnerable state, who are seeking some sort of assistance, and we as professionals want to make sure we are providing the best possible care that we can do. Therefore, again, because we want to provide the best possible care, we must have the skills that can be beneficial and helpful to our clients or patients, depending on the language we want to use. In addition, not only is that our own kind of personal preference, but because of the importance of our work, there's other organizations that are created to make sure we're able to do our best work. So example of other organizations could be regulatory bodies, such as licensure boards. So most mental health providers are licensed, again, depending on the state. So those licensure boards are designed to be a regulatory body to make sure that those who have those licenses are following certain standards and procedures, and that there may be possible consequences if they deviate from those standards and procedures. In addition to the regulatory bodies, we also have educational programs, which we see as early gatekeepers, because educational programs such as graduate programs where you learn to become a therapist or mental health provider have a framework of what standards, policies, and procedures that you must show some sort of competence to in order to get a degree. In addition to that, we also have professional associations such as the American Counseling Association, the American Psychological Association, even regional associations that also can add what it means to be a professional and have their own standards and policies and even gatekeeping element because they may provide more continuing education or other competencies such as certifications or other diplomas. So that's a professional practice, is essentially making sure what we're doing has some sort of professional standard, and that if someone seeks out our services, that we are using the approaches that are going to be helpful to that person. We're not just some random person on the street, that we come with credentials and education and even backing from regulatory bodies such as a licensure as well as professional associations that with the intent of showing that if when we work with other individuals that we have some sort of professional competency to do our job. In addition to that, we have ethics. Ethics is more philosophical, where compared to professional practice is more like concrete because we can have formal and written standards. And then ethical ethics is more of kind of informal and striving for a certain goal. And because of that, many of us who've entered the mental health fields, we did this because we wanted to be helpers. And as helpers, many of us do not want to cause harm. Therefore, we want our behaviors to be as beneficial as possible. However, there's going to be times when we're not sure what we should do. Therefore, we can use ethical principles and other decision-making models to help us make some sort of clinical judgment to enact in this kind of gray, complex area, some sort of direction we should go into. And that's where these elements come into practice, when they come together, or is what I should say. Because in our clinical practice, when we have a decision that we're not sure how to proceed, we can rely on professional practices like the standards from regulatory bodies, what our scope of license is, what we can and can't do with that license, what we learned from our educational programs, as well as the standard practices of professional associations. So we can see the rules, and then we can use ethical principles to understand how those rules can apply to our situation. Sometimes it's clean cut, and other times it's not so much. So with the more gray, then we'll have to use kind of more ethical decision-making models to at least give some sort of reason to and justifications for our decision that we've made. So let's continue more with ethics. Again, as alluded to earlier, ethics stems from a discipline of philosophy that explores moral judgments and problems. Three common ethical schools that we're going to focus on today is virtue ethics, consequential ethics, and deontological ethics. And this comes from Durbin in 2012. I have references at the end of the slide if you would like to learn more. I would highly suggest looking at those references. So one way we can look at ethics is to really kind of simplify it as really this philosophical field of trying to define what is good and what is the right thing to do. Again, that is a very simplified element for that. But for today's class, we're going to kind of just simplify things. If you were curious to learn more, then a deeper dive in philosophy and ethics could be a way to kind of just get a stronger grasp on this. So again, the kind of question that comes up when we look at ethics is, what does it mean to be good? That's an easy question for me to ask, but it's not an easy answer. How do we know what the right thing is? What your right thing is may be different than what my right thing is. And again, depending on the time, the context, situation, and every other detail that may impact this dilemma, there may not be one right universal answer. It may have to be context specific. So, as I alluded to earlier, ethics typically can be seen as informal, means there's not always a written law or rule to follow. So ethical dilemmas are typically highly complex and situation specific, And the result is there may be multiple possible answers on how we navigate and deal with those complex issues. So let's start off with virtue ethics. And let me move my screen here. So virtue ethics believes that there's some inherent way to live or to behave. So the question that kind of comes up with virtue ethics is, what is the right thing to do? Because again, virtue ethics believe there is this ideal or this virtue that kind of is the best way to live the life. So according to Dorbin, some elements that are common in virtue ethics is the aspire to behave a certain way and to avoid inappropriate behaviors. Traits such as integrity, honesty, loyalty, truthfulness, and respect are important for being ethical. And as we continue through this course, many of the professional ethics that are created by the associations and regulatory bodies really have virtue ethics as a core principle, because many disciplines see mental health providers as people who should avoid inappropriate behaviors and are expected to behave certain ways. So the classic is, it's inappropriate to cross certain boundaries. It's inappropriate to use our role that has a powerful status to manipulate or take advantage of our clients. We don't want to cause harm. So there's a virtue element to most ethical principles from professional associations. In addition, you'll see this idea of that professional in mental health should have integrity, should be honest, should have loyalty, truthfulness, and respect. So there is a strong integration of virtue ethics in many of our standards or practices. And again, though, situations are going to be complex, so sometimes virtues can actually cause harm. Therefore, we need balance. So, for example, there's going to be times, though, where maybe having too rigid of boundaries could cause potential issues for clients. Something that comes to mind is classic psychoanalysis for a long time had this model of what we called the blank screen, where because of the importance of professional boundaries, the therapist would not disclose any personal information to the clients. Unfortunately, for some clients, that actually caused some psychological harm. So again, that means, like, even with the virtue ethics model, there sometimes need to be flexibility depending on the situation. Okay. The next is consequential ethics. So consequential ethics is kind of this idea of focusing, doing the good or best thing. And then to do this, we try to understand what the consequences of our actions may be. We're trying to kind of predict the future. Okay, if I engage this way, what is going to be the result of my actions? For many mental health professionals, we can kind of see how this integrates to kind of cognitive behavioral therapy in a way of how, okay, let's mentalize what is going to be the consequence of engaging this way. So then from that kind of intellectual or imaginative experience, we're going to strive to do the best possible outcome. So we can not know what's going to happen in the future, but consequential ethics is trying to our best using logic, analysis, and reason to figure out, okay, what is most likely going to happen if I engage this way. So again, with this, our intentions may be good, but what is most important is the consequences of our action. So again, going back to old school classic psychoanalysis with the promotion of the blank screen approach, is the intention was good, especially from a clinical standpoint. To really simplify, this comes from Freudian ideology where, okay, if I want this person to grow as an individual and to have less suffering from a psychological level, then I need to create an atmosphere where they can project their past issues onto me, and then we can work with it. And the best way to project this is I'm going to create like a blank screen, and that's going to kind of facilitate that process. For some clients though, especially in clients who had a lot of neglect, abuse, That was very frightening to have to be in a therapeutic relationship that someone was giving no feedback. Think of it from your own experience. It can be annoying if someone's giving you the cold shoulder or is not answering the questions you have. It can be maddening, it can create anxiety, it can be really stressful. So it can be harmful in a way. So again, the intention was good from this classic psychoanalytic model, but for some people, the consequences cause more harm than what the intention thought it was going to be. So the question from a consequential ethics is, how will my actions impact others? So again, in times of ethical decisions, we have to think, okay, if I do this certain action, how is that going to impact my clients? How's it going to impact other stakeholders in that client's life? How's that going to impact me? How's it going to impact my profession, etc., etc. Just trying to think, okay, if this happens, what's going to be the result? The next and final kind of model we'll be focusing on is deontological ethics. So from this perspective, we may not know what is right or what the possible outcome of our action is going to be. Sometimes we can't think of what's going to happen. There may be too much complexity where the situation may be really outside our scope of awareness, or we may be new to the field and not have much clinical experience. So sometimes we really may feel lost. So deontological ethics is going to be interested in the decision-making process, especially when the dilemma is complex. So again, with a lot of ethical decision-making models that we'll focus on later in this class, we're going to see a deontological inspiration because it's focused on the process. For those that come from counseling backgrounds, whether counseling psychology or clinical mental health counseling, school counseling, etc., in your programs, you may have heard this idea of trust the process. And in therapy, the process can be more important than the beginning or the outcome. So the process is what we're going to focus on from a deontological ethics. So again, according to Dorbin, some core elements are making decisions going to be based off reason and logic. We're going to respect the autonomy of our others, and the other way, only focus on what we can control. And then we're going to follow through with whatever decision we make through. We're going to follow through whatever decision that we decide upon in a consistent manner. So what we mean by that, after all this game planning you've made, it's not going to be worth anything if you don't follow through correctly with your decision-making element of this. So again, that's kind of the responsibility integrity component, that once you make your decision, you should take every effort you can to address that situation in a consistent manner. So it's important to remember, again, that the world is complex. Therefore, we most likely will use an integration of various ethic models in order to make a decision when presented with an ethical dilemma. Remember, there's a lot of gray area in just life in general. So depending on the situation we're in, especially the professional situation, professionals should have various answers on what actions should be taken. Therefore, it is important when faced with a dilemma to seek out consultation with peers, colleagues, reference appropriate resources, i.e. code of ethics, and document the process. So now we're going to focus on regulations. Regulations apply ethical principles into formal or written rules. So again, ethics, very informal, very philosophical, kind of abstract. So regulations are going to come from regulatory bodies to take these principles and make them into kind of written rules, laws, or standards of practice. So again, regulations are going to include laws, standards of practice, professional code of ethics. They're going to be managed by governing body or bodies that have been given the power from some sort of institution, whether it be federally, state, even internationally, that they can enforce these regulations. So many of you are taking the MHRTC. So as an MHRTC practicing in Maine, you're responsible to adhere to federal, state, and local laws, as well as standards or practices such as the MHRTC Code of Conduct. So the thing to remember too, ethical principles are rather static. So again, once they're written, it can take some time for them to be changed. So to give an example, for the American Counseling Association, the last time they were revised was in 2014. And so especially when it comes to certain policies regarding telehealth, there may be some outdatedness because again, compared to now, 2014, so 6 years ago, there's a lot that may have changed with technology. So again, it can take some time for those principles to change. But compared to, okay, excuse me, I am kind of screwed that up. So what I meant to say is when we look at ethical principles are going to be rather static. Okay. So what I mean by that is, again, the principles that we have talked about have existed for many, many, many years. Regulations, on the other hand, can be more dynamic. So again, going back to the ACA 2014, is there's going to be changes as society changes. So prior to 2014, with the American Counseling Association, there was not much focus on teletherapy. And again, with COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure there's going to be more changes to those protocols because of societal and technological influences. So I apologize if that just confused you. I confused myself, kind of went down the wrong rabbit hole. But to remember too that ethical principles are going to be static, while regulations and written rules are going to be more dynamic, which means they have the ability to change. So again, to make another quick point, ethics, if you take an ethics class, especially from philosophy, you're talking about principles, whether it be from Greeks, Europeans, even Confucius, ethics, etc. These are ethic principles that have not changed since they were developed thousands, hundreds of years ago, where rules and regulations, if you were a therapist in the 1960s compared to now, the codes of conduct have greatly changed in 40 years compared to ethical principles in thousands of years. So hopefully that clarification makes more sense and I haven't confused you too much. So moving on to this slide, three major developers of regulations. Okay, so we're going to focus on how really different associations, professional bodies, and bureaucracies are going to develop these rules and scopes of practices of how mental health providers should engage as professionals. So the first level is going to be our associations, like the American Counseling Association, American Psychological Association, National Association for Social Workers, hopefully getting the drift, and interest groups. So typically, these are going to set the standard of a profession and determine what a profession can do, scope of practice. So again, major associations and interest groups are going to really decide, okay, let's give the definition of what this profession can do and not do. So they develop a scope of practice, which is essentially a list of, if this is what the profession, then professionals in this profession should have the competency to do this, and they should not be able to do that because they don't have the competencies. Okay, so for example, counselors, we have the competencies to provide various type of mental health therapies for various mental disorders, and we can diagnose that as well. But because we're not trained as medical professionals, we do not have the ability to prescribe medications. That's outside of our scope of practice. Okay, so what requirements and training are going to be required to perform the job is integrated into the scope of practice. In addition, again, what types of behaviors that are appropriate and inappropriate for the professional is going to be defined in the scope of practice. In our kind of Western professional world, associations are going to be seen as experts in that professional field. So again, like I said numerous times, The gold standards are going to be the national or international associations of that field. The next level is what we're going to call congressional, and that is essentially legislative power that's going to create laws that are going to influence a profession. So this is where we're going to take kind of these ideals and ethics and create more formal written rules on giving power to that profession as well as consequences to that profession. So we have associations that design and create the profession. We have Congress that gives power that influence that profession. And the third element is the bureaucraticness, which will manage operational and institutional duties, which include providing accreditations and reprimands for professionals. So that can be our licensing boards, that can be our professional associations, that can be even institutions, but they're all going to have these different kind of flavors essentially as they're operating, and they have some sort of idea where they can provide as well as take away professional ability. So all three areas work together and they're going to need each other to have power. So this visualization hopefully demonstrates what we have a triangle. In the triangle, we need all three components in order for the triangle to be stable and consistent. So again, let's start off with associations, okay? So associations interest groups are again seen as experts of the field or their group of professionals. So the example would be the American Counseling Association. Now, below this, we have the congressional element of regulations. So they're going to pass laws and regulations and create rules of how counselors and professionals connected as counselors can work in the state of Maine. So that's going to be example, Maine legislators, okay? Then finally, because we have this Maine legislation rules, now we're going to have someone who has to manage those rules, and then we have a bureaucracy. So we're going to have an institution designed to manage operations and enforcement duties. So that's going to be seen as our Maine Board of Counseling Professionals. So if we step back, why it's important to know this triangle of regulations. As a counselor or any mental health professional in any state, you are responsible for following the compliance and the rules related to all three elements of the triangle. So again, let's say we have a counselor who's in the state of Maine. So if they're living in Maine, their association that they're affiliated with is the American Counseling Association. The American Counseling Association has standards of practices and ethical codes. So just because you're part of that professional association, part of that profession, you're respected, not respected. You are, it's expected of you that you follow those codes of ethics, okay? Now, living in Maine and practicing in Maine, you no doubt are going to be impacted by the laws of Maine related to your profession, as well as just being a citizen of that state. And then finally, with that, the license that you have and the ability to practice in that state and make a living in that state is going to be based off the bureaucracy, and you have to follow their instructions and duties as well. For example, there's some rules where if you move or change location, you have to send a change of address request. Also, the bureaucracy can determine what credentials you need in order, or how much continuing education units you need in order to renew your license, what type of specific trainings you need, how many ethics hours, etc. So all those different components are going to dictate your professional practice. So we're going to take a breather, threw a lot at you, but again, remember that as a mental health provider, there's going to be standards of what that means and how you practice. So those are professional practice elements. In addition to that, we have ethics of how you should behave and how you should respond and deal with situations that you're not sure how you should respond or deal with, ethical decision making. In addition to that, we have regulations from associations, legislative bodies, and bureaucracies that are all going to kind of dictate your professional practice and how you should be ethical in the behaviors you do, because there may be consequences for your actions. And all of this, again, is designed to not only protect us, but really to protect our clients, because we want our profession to have some respect and trust by the public. And so when providers do unethical situations, they can cause reputational harm, which can be negative or can have a negative impact on our community. What I mean by that, if we have individuals who sully the reputation of the profession, especially a profession that's designed to help others, that may prevent other people who need help from seeking it because they're worried about the reputation of other providers. So that's why we have those three major layers. We have associations, we have the congressional or legislative part, and then we have the bureaucracy, all to protect the public, create public trust, as well as create professional kind of respect and reputation management. So finally, course layout. So here we had module 1, that was our introduction. We're going to talk about in the next module, professional conduct. So what that means, how you should engage yourself as a profession in the mental health component. Module 3 is going to be empowering consumers. We'll talk more about that. There's certain views and rights that consumers have, and we want to respect those consumers, and we want to respect autonomy as well. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about self-care and supervision. We'll get into confidentiality, professional practice, as well as ethics and ethical decision making. So thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. And I'm going to end the video.